Welcome to State of Tech. My name's Jared, and today we're going to talk about the top 5 reasons why you would choose a Razer Blade over a MacBook Pro. Now, in another video, I talk about the flip side of it. Why would you want to choose, or why you would choose a MacBook Pro over a Razer Blade? For me, I've been a longtime Mac user. Prior to that, I was a Windows user. Prior to that, I was a Mac user. So I've been kind of back and forth. And the last year and a half, probably closer to a year, I've been teetering. And for a while, I was Windows only again, because Windows 10 is great. I got nothing bad to say about Windows 10, really, compared to where it's came from. So the whole kind of debate between Windows versus Mac really comes down to a choice few things these days. And those are the things that I'm going to talk about in this video. Some of those things may be important to you, some of them might not be. So feel free in the comment section below to maybe put in your thoughts as to why you would choose the Razer Blade over the MacBook Pro, because I'd love to hear your opinion too. Might be different than mine, and that's totally cool. This isn't the only 5 reasons. These are my 5 reasons, and I'd love to hear what you have to say as well down in the comment section below. So the first thing is the GPU performance, and that encompasses a lot of things. Having an extremely powerful GPU like the GTX 1060 in such a small body means you're going to be able to run all the games that you want to run on this and get excellent performance out of the laptop. So your gaming now can be mobile, and you aren't going to have to sacrifice as much as you used to with prior Windows PCs, because the architecture has changed of the graphics card inside of these machines, and now they're able to fit desktop class performance in a laptop, which is insane. The size of this laptop, and the fact that a year ago you had to build a desktop that was as big as 20 of these machines stacked high in order to get that kind of performance. So GPU performance, which GTX 1060 is a ton faster than what comes in the MacBook Pro. So I'm not even going to compare and say apples to apples or whatever. I mean, the GTX 1060 is light years faster for gaming than what it comes in the MacBook Pro. So there's no comparison there. That's why it's the number one thing I think if you're going to choose. If you're teetering as to whether you choose a Razer or another Windows laptop, if gaming is important to you, having that performance, that GPU performance, you're gonna get that out of the current line of Windows machines. You're not gonna get that for gaming and for video editing in Adobe Premiere Pro and stuff like that. If you want good video editing performance out of a Mac, you're gonna have to use Final Cut Pro X. Premiere Pro performance, you're just not gonna get that out of a Mac that you would get on a Razer Blade like this. And that's the main reason that I got this, was so that I can have an extremely powerful video editing machine. And that was the main definitive reason. I wanted a good sleek machine. Razer has that. I wanted GPU performance. So the next thing is the display options. You have 4K or 1080 HD display options that you can choose from. I opted for the 4K display. I'm not really too sure why, because 4K is an awful lot of pixels to have in a 14-inch display. And in this 14-inch display, running 4K everything's too tiny. It's too hard to use. So you kind of have to back the resolution down a little bit to even make it useful. The only reason that I think 4K would be useful are for those of you that have games that do run well in 4K, or that do support 4K. You can definitely run them on this machine. I don't necessarily think that the 1060 is quite powerful enough to run those 4K games. I think that if you're wanting to buy a Razer for gaming, you're probably better off going with the 1080 right now. I mean the 1080 HD version of the laptop as opposed to the 4K. But you can choke it down and get the resolution closer to what a MacBook Pro has, kind of that sweet spot in between. Some call it 2K, 2.5K. You would, or Quad HD or whatever, you would have, Quad HD is what they're calling this, QHD, 4K-ish. But nonetheless, the display resolution for a creative is a little bit more challenging on the Razer than it is the MacBook Pro. but for gaming, for media consumption and stuff like that, having 4K is great if you're watching 4K movies, if you're playing games that are 4K. And then those of you that prefer to be in the 1080 resolution, you have that as well. You don't have that native resolution on this computer here. This display is like 2560 something or other, and so it's not 1080, and things can appear stretched sometimes on a Mac, especially games and stuff like that. And then gaming isn't even that good of an experience on the Mac anyways. If you're into gaming, you're definitely looking at a machine like this. So 4K and 1080 options are good, but with caveats, I guess you could say. So the I/O on this particular laptop is far superior to this, depending on how you look at it. The MacBook Pro has 4 USB-C ports on the side of it, which that's great that they're USB-C ports, but that really sucks for all of us who have so many things that connect using USB-A. USB-C is great, but I feel like they kind of are forcing our hand at buying a lot of dongles and attachment accessories or upgrading perfectly good stuff to new stuff because we don't want to have so many dongles. I'm glad that they have 4 ports on here, but they all require adapters usually to use. Whereas on the Razer Blade here, over on this side, we've got a full HDMI port. We have a USB-A, which is 3.1, I think, USB port. And then we have a USB-C Thunderbolt 3 port, which is a very fast port that allows for external GPUs. And then over on this side, we have our headphone jack, we have our power adapter, and then we have 2 USB type A ports over on this side. So good I/O as far as, being able to plug in accessories. The keyboard also, I believe, is just better on the Razer, not because it lights up all fancy and does, the chroma stuff, which is cool, but just not my thing. But the actual key throw, the feel of typing on this machine, I'm just not used to these super short throw keys that barely feel like you're typing anything and they feel like they're getting stuck all the time. It's just a new weird experience for me. I like the keyboard on the Razer much better than I like the keyboard on the MacBook Pro. The trackpad also on the MacBook Pro is massive and sometimes a challenge to use. I do like the fact that there aren't any buttons on this trackpad on the Mac. You basically push down to click, versus on the Razer you have 2 physical buttons at the bottom. So when I'm using this laptop in my lap, I'm not super skinny, so the laptop's kind of pushed up against me and it becomes a little challenging to hit those buttons. But I like having the buttons. I like having physical buttons. I like the keyboard and the way it feels and the throw on the keys, even though people complain about the Razer keyboard. I bet if you ask those same people whether they would want the Razer keyboard over the MacBook Pro keyboard, they would choose the Razer keyboard because there's a little bit of throw in there, a little bit of tactile feedback. It just feels a little bit better to me typing on the Razer than it does. So all around, I think the input-output options on the Razer are just better than what's on the MacBook Pro. Ask me again in a couple years, I might have changed my tone, but right now, I just like what's available for me here on this Razer over the MacBook Pro. So number 4 is Windows 10. Windows 10 is great. I have no gripes. I mean, I have gripes about everything, but not as many gripes about Windows 10 as I used to of previous versions of Windows. Windows 10 is probably just one of the first usable operating systems that Microsoft has put out for me since Windows XP. Windows 10 is great. It has great features. The user experience is good. It's just an overall great experience as an operating system. And I know that that's not, you can get Windows 10 on a lot of things. What I do love about Razer is that they left Windows 10 alone. They didn't throw a bunch of nonsense over the top like some people with 4-letter business names do, and a lot of other computer manufacturers throw a lot of bloatware, throw a lot of stuff over the top of Windows 10, and it just becomes convoluted. And the fact that this machine only comes in a 16 gigabyte RAM version, like, I just don't want all that nonsense running and using up resources. So Windows 10 on this machine is great. The way that Razer integrated their additional services as applications that run instead of being, core modifications to the Windows platform. I just love the way that it works, and I love the way that Windows feels on this machine. And I've had a Dell XPS earlier this year. I've had Lenovo machines, and I just really like the way that Razer has integrated Windows 10 or with Windows 10. They've done a great job on that, and it's one of the reasons why I would choose the Razer Blade comparing it to other Windows 10 devices with similar specs. So the last thing is the external GPU options, which I've heard some people have been able to finagle an external GPU on the MacBook Pro, but the external GPU that you can get, that you can add on to this, I mean, Razer makes their Razer Core, which I have. I have a Razer Core with a GTX 1080 that's slightly overclocked, and it is blazingly fast when editing video. And when I play some games, which I don't game a whole lot, but when I play games, having that extra horsepower of that GTX 1080 to power my monitor, because I have a good size monitor, a nice ultra wide, beautiful display, it gives me that extra horsepower that is not being robbed from my system, so that I can still get good frame rates when I'm playing my game, so I'm not getting lag, not having those issues, the game runs smoothly, and just the overall experience is better because I have that extra horsepower. Now, the difference between the 1060 and the 1080 is quite large because, there's the difference in the specs between those two as well. But the fact that, the GTX 1060 that's in here is still really small. The airflow isn't as good as a full-on, desktop class graphics card. There are differences there. And having that external GPU also acts as a hub. So I plug in here to this Thunderbolt 3 USB-C port, and then in the back of that Razer Core, I have additional input-output, so some USB Type A, so I could plug in the little Bluetooth adapter, little wireless adapter for my keyboard and mouse. I could plug in a microphone that I use quite often. I could plug in a card reader for SD cards and CF cards and all that stuff. So it's one cable I plug in here, and I've got all the stuff attached to it already. Plus, I've got a GTX 1080. My monitor's already connected to it, so it's just great. It's a great overall experience having that. You can get hubs for all of your computers, but can you get a hub that actually increases the performance of your computer? Not for a whole lot of computers. So the fact that you can run an external GPU with the Razer Core plugged into the Razer Blade is a huge, huge, huge pro over using a MacBook Pro, which does not currently have those options. So to me, that's a huge thing. That's a huge one. These top 5 reasons to choose a Razer Blade over a MacBook Pro are probably stronger arguments, I would say, than in my other video where I would give you 10 reasons to choose a MacBook Pro over a Razer Blade, especially if you play games at all, and especially if you edit video or use any heavy rendering software that is GPU intensive. I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna give you another video where I give you comparisons and rendering between the two machines, because a lot of you are video editors and you want that sort of information, especially if you're battling between having a MacBook Pro and a Razer Blade. If you're into games and that's your main concern, this video is probably a waste of your time because you know that this is the machine for you. But if you're a creative, if you're editing video, if you are using applications that are GPU intense, the Razer Blade is definitely a great option for you. The only time that wouldn't be the case is if you're a Final Cut Pro X user for video editing, which then also, why are you watching this video? So anyways, that's gonna do it for this video. If you wanna see the video where I talk about the top 5 reasons to choose a MacBook Pro, check out the link at the end of this video or in the description below. There's also links in the description below to both of these units, both of these computers on Amazon, so that you can check them out, see the specs, see the prices, see the different options, just in case you haven't bought one yet. So that's going to do it for this video. Give it a thumbs up if you found it useful, and give us a subscribe here on the channel so that you can be notified when we put out new videos. We appreciate you being here and watching these videos. If you have any thoughts, comments, questions, do them in the comment section below. We'd love to communicate with you. And thanks so much for being here. We'll see you next time on State of Tech.